Si, lorsque vous vous trouviez dans la grande rétrospective de vos œuvres qui a eu lieu dernièrement à la Tête Galerie, quelqu'un vous avait demandé, Marcel Duchamp, qu'avez-vous fait de votre vie? Qu'est-ce que vous lui auriez répondu ou à quoi auriez-vous songé en premier lieu?
J'ai une sorte de me servir de la peinture, me servir de l'art comme pour établir un modus vivendi, une sorte de façon de comprendre la vie, c'est-à-dire probablement d'essayer de faire de ma vie elle-même une œuvre d'art, au lieu de passer ma vie à faire des œuvres d'art sous forme de tableaux, sous forme de sculpture. Je le pense maintenant, je n'ai pas pensé au moment où je le faisais, qu'on pouvait très bien faire de sa vie, c'est-à-dire sa façon de respirer, sa façon d'agir, sa façon de réagir avec des autres individus. On peut traiter ça comme un tableau, si vous voulez, comme un tableau vivant, même un tableau de cinéma, si vous voulez. Et je crois que, en tout cas, c'est mes conclusions maintenant. Je vous répète bien que ça n'a jamais été voulu et organisé quand j'avais 20 ans ou 15 ans, mais je me rends compte maintenant, après de nombreuses années, qu'au fond c'est à ça que j'ai tendu.
Well, Marcel, these don't seem your earliest work.
No. The earliest is this one in the corner, the church. That was done in my village in 1902.
How old were you?
I was 15 then. And then I went on about some more of that period, but they're not here.
It's rather impressionist, isn't it? Is that what was the vogue?
Yeah, well, it was not the vogue, it was the only thing we talked about, you see. I mean, it was...
It was advanced even then.
Yeah, it was advanced, and yet, when you see these two, which are later, already Impressionism has gone down in vogue. So
they're more structural.
They're more structural, and Cézanne has been recognized then, and Cézanne is the great man, and I was influenced by Cézanne in those two paintings, you see. This is my two brothers playing chess in the garden, and this is my father.
Well, the whole family were painters, your sister and brother?
No, one sister paints, yes, but especially my brother, Bidon, paints.
But did they bring you into this Cézanne impressionist?
No, it was all on my own. No.
Just in the air?
In the air, especially, yes. Yeah. And my father was very nice about it. In fact, it was very difficult then as it is now to become a painter on your own. How can you expect to live, etc., etc. So he was a good man.
He looks patient to have set that portrait up.
Yeah.
There seems to be quite a step between this and the nude descending a staircase.
Yes, the nude was 2 years later.
1912.
1912. And it was after these that I decided that no more obvious influences as I had before. I wanted to at least be living in my day, and my day was Cubism. See, 1910, 11, 12, Cubism was in its childhood, and the approach was so different from the previous movements that I was very much attracted toward it. And I began being a Cubist painter, and finally I came to the nude.
The nude, however, has something of movement in it that the Cubists didn't seem to be interested in.
It. You see, there was also Futurism at that time.
The Italians.
Italian Futurism. But I didn't know about it.
You weren't in Munich? You were
in Italy, no. I never knew any. You see, the famous Futurist show in Paris was in January 1912, when I was painting this. So I hadn't seen it. There's a coincidence there. Of course, you might say it was in the air. But I didn't actually know the Futurists, but I did this painting with the idea of using movement as one of the elements in it. And next year, the following year, I sent it at the invitation of American painters Davis and Walter Parr.
It was an event in American painting history,
I know, but it's only now, that even now that we know it, 40 years later. At the moment, it might have been an explosion of a success for a week or 10 days and finished in a feu de paille.
Yes.
But it went on. Then that was not enough for me. I went on with the idea that, all right, I had done what I could with Cubism, in my opinion, and immediately wanted to change. This idea of changing, not repeating myself. I could have done 10 nudes probably at that time if I wanted to. I decided not to go that. That will come into another discussion probably about why I did that. But I went immediately into another formula, which is the formula of the chocolate grinder. I was in Rouen, in one of the shops, showing through the glass an actual chocolate grinder. That a manufacturer of chocolate showed his chocolate grinder in the window. And it amused me so much that I took it as a point of departure.
But what was different in your point of view here than in any normal still life of a chocolate grinder? Was it a mechanical interest?
Yes,
Is that
of course, the mechanical side of it influenced me then, or at least that was also the point of departure of a new form of technique. I couldn't go into the haphazard drawing or the faults or the painting, the splashing of the paint. I wanted to go back to a completely dry drawing, dry conception of art. And the mechanical drawing, for me, was the best form of that dry form of art.
accuracy, precision?
Accuracy, precision, nothing of that handiwork.
Chance.
Chance. Well, chance is another question, but I mean, in that actual drawing, the precision that I could not be even liked by all the people who liked Impressionism and all this. It was a new decision on my part to get away from even Cubism then.
A painting called The Chocolate Grinder, which was done shortly after his return to Paris, in which he is taking an idea of movement rather than describing in an illustrative way the possibilities of something moving. He takes something which can't have any meaning unless it is simply that of motion. And he paints it almost as an emblem. It's a kind of device which stands for motion.
Up to that epoch, around 1910-12, the great thing was the patte, what they call in French the patte, which means the hand. The hand, you know, there's certain arabesque that your hand always makes, like Toulouse-Lautrec, and even every artist, or even Velasquez, you see. I mean, there's something which belongs to the hand, not to the mind. And I thought, probably at that time, that using a bit of the mind wouldn't be bad.
For the next 11 years, until 1923, and on and off for the rest of his life, Duchamp launched a series of perfectly calculated, humorous attacks on what was and what was not a work of art. He had already introduced the idea of movement, which was to occur again and again, and of painting as a diagram, a kind of blueprint devoid of any sensuous appeal. Now he turned to chance and to choice. First he applied chance to the laws of measurement, which are generally taken for granted, but which for Duchamp are just arbitrary approximations. He made his own measures.
I used 3 threads of 1 meter long and dropped it from 1 meter high on a horizontal surface. And whatever the shape the thread in falling took when it arrived on the bottom, at the bottom, I would keep exactly as it fell. And to fix it, I just fixed it with varnish, drops of varnish. And this operation repeated 3 times gave me what we call the standard stoppages, which I am very proud of because I think it's an interesting part, especially being the meter long, so it's a unit of length treated in an aesthetic form.
This was a way of tracking chants.
Yes, yes, I even call it canned chants.
Air of Paris, 50 cubic centimeters, in a specially made glass phial. Cage with cuttlebone and thermometer containing lumps of sugar, which turn out to be cubes of marble, by Rose C'est la Vie. Hat rack, chosen in 1917. Duchamp calls these objects ready-mades. Were they a comment on the ridiculous price paid for a painter's signature? Were they drawing attention to objects which were just as much works of art as accepted works of art? Or were they a joke? The essential thing is that they were chosen by the artist.
Ready-made is, see, first, in the first place, when I first started, I didn't have the word at my disposal. I had not invented the word yet, or at least taken in. For example, in that bicycle wheel, see here, it was 1913, it was in Paris. I didn't, the word didn't exist. The thought did not exist in my mind of something like that. It just happened to be some kind of a bicycle wheel in my studio just for fun, the way you have a fire in the fireplace as a sort of distraction, a movement again, probably. That was probably the first expression of movement. It was just after the nude, and it went with the idea of movement, you know. Well, then, after that, in 14, I had a thing called the bottle rack. It was a dryer for bottles, you know, made of iron, manufactured. And I just chose it, and that's what the definition of a ready-made is the choice of the artist is enough to transfer it from a functional or industrial form into supposed to be aesthetic, but very different from aesthetic in general. The Independence incident, when I sent that urinal to be shown, is one incident. The jury, there was no jury, but the people who were organizing it decided it couldn't be shown, that urinal. So instead of, they didn't know it was I was concerned with it because I didn't sign my name, as you know, with the name instead. So they just took the thing and threw it away above the partition. So it was between partitions and you couldn't see it. It was hidden. In fact, we didn't know where it was for the whole length of the show. It only at the end that we found it behind the partition and we recuperated it.
And what about the Gioconda?
Gioconda was another thing that I made here in Paris in 1919 before going back to America. And, well, it was one of these gestures because I added an inscription. This was another ready-made, but its own kind. But I have called ready-made aided or assisted, which means that I added something to it, which in the case of the Gioconda, I added a little moustache and a little goatee. And also wrote underneath something very risky. And that was all.
Duchamp's great ambition was a very, very bold one. It wasn't how to be a better artist. It was how to redefine the question of what is it to be an artist. He himself said in an interview that probably his greatest contribution among many to the art of that century was the idea of the ready-made. A ready-made work of art is something that Duchamp came up with in the teens, 19-teens. And it was the idea that literally he could go to a store, choose an item, or maybe a couple of items, and put them together, set it up in his studio, and call it a work of art. This means that all of these notions that had gone for centuries with the idea of an artist, such as that you were a skilled painter, or that you knew how to carve or to mold, all of these ideas associated with the beauty of a creation or with the suddenness of inspiration are gone. He, of course, was a painter when he started out, first making Impressionist pictures. Then, after Picasso led the way with Cubism, he made a variety of Cubist paintings. After he had been painting for about a decade, he decided, you know, what's the point if I'm one more very good or even excellent painter? I'm not changing the world. He bought a bicycle wheel and a kitchen stool, put them together, the wheel on top of the stool, and kept it in his studio. And from time to time, he would rotate the wheel. One of the first ready-mades he made when he got to New York, where he was encountering snow, was a work that he called In Advance of the Broken Arm. Oftentimes, the ready-mades had a title that was part of the work of art. Brought it at a hardware store on the Upper West Side, took it to his studio, hung it up. That was a ready-made. People, what should I say, tend to romanticize quite a bit the meaning. What's the choice behind the wheel and the stool? Is it sedentary and motion? Is it round and round? You can go on, and it brings out some really kind of almost like parodies of what art historians or critics might say. But Duchamp maintained that it wasn't a matter of aesthetics and that what really was a matter of the artist's brain. And when he said that this was one of his greatest contributions, if not his greatest, to the art of the century, I think what he was going for was the idea that all of this took away the artist's or the viewer's retina as the most important thing. And Duchamp called painting retinal art. And it was sort of like it was all about what you would see with brushstroke and color. Duchamp is trying to say retinal is substituting a lot for just dumbness, almost like religion is the opiate of the people. Let's get away from that and let's get some ideas going. This one is called Why Not Sneeze? Rose C'est la Vie. Its title is a question. Rose C'est la Vie was his pseudonym, his female alter ego name. Totally puzzling question, why not sneeze? What we've got is a bird cage with some marble sugar cubes, a cuttlefish bone, and a little thermometer. Put together all of these store-bought items in a collage of objects.
Ready-made, I call them ready-made. It's a name for them. Now, let me show you. This is a ready-made bird cage with, if you see me, having a hard time because this is not sugar, this is marble and it weighs a ton. And that was one of the elements that interested me when I made it, you see. It's ready-made and the sugar is changing to marble. It's a sort of mythological effect. This is a ready-made dating back from 1916. It's a ball of twine between two plaques of copper, brass. And before I finished it, Arsberg put something inside the ball of twine, and never told me what it was, and I didn't want to know. It was a sort of secret, and it makes a noise, so we call this a ready-made with a secret noise, and listen to it. I never know, I don't know, I will never know whether it's a diamond or a coin.
I came on to Duchamp's work maybe when I was in art school, and he had an approach to making art that was a little unconventional. There were thoughts about art that always seemed to come back to genuine oil paintings and sculpture and things like that, and so he offered something else to the world, and it was a little strange and unsettling but provocative. And I was fortunate enough to meet Mr. Duchamp, and he was sort of the opposite of what we expected an artist to be, which was in paint pants and scruffy and all that, but he was in Sunday best. He had a suit and tie, I like these odd sort of challenges between the ball of twine there, which is sort of an innocent object in itself, and then it's contained, forcibly contained by this oppressive thing, you know, this metallic thing that's holding this together. It just asks to be talked about. Language was always something with Mr. Duchamp throughout his work. His use of language, I think his titling, the titles he put on his work are equally as provocative as his works themselves. And it's got power to it that it's almost like the Maltese falcon, or it's some sort of silent sphinx. It's not going to give up its answer. It's sort of says everything and says nothing at the same time. I guess it was like the power of puzzlement. You know, he put a puzzle to things that offered some kind of challenge that maybe conventional art didn't really offer. And so you begin to really look at his work, and not so much in an intellectual way, but in a visual way. And it just causes you to really appreciate a piece of art.
Duchamp's ideas of movement, painting as diagram, and canned chants culminate in this picture called The Bride Stripped Bare by Her Bachelor's Even. Richard Hamilton has spent a year reconstructing it. The original in Philadelphia is too fragile to travel.
Why did you choose to do it on glass?
Because mainly the transparency of the glass. I wanted to. I had always noticed that the trouble with an oil painting and easel painting is you never know how to do the background. You make a portrait or you make some scene or some still life, and then comes the background. What are you going to do in the background? You put something in the background and it always false, or at least very seldom justified. It's just a filling up canvas. With the glass you don't have to do that. The glass is transparent, and you put anything behind you wish, and you change it every day if you wish as well. And that was for me an element of novelty to convince me I could go on with it.
The whole picture, which Duchamp worked on for 8 years, is on one level an allegory of erotic desire and frustration, seen in a complicated language of mechanical and literary terms invented by Duchamp. It's very difficult to understand. The bachelor figures at the bottom of the glass are represented by emblematic molds and are cut off from the bride above. They are activated by a gas which awakens desires that can never be satisfied. They are an endless frustration machine. Above them, the bride mechanism receives their coded messages and sends back palpitating orders. A gasoline of love flows from her. She's in a state of being continually mechanically stripped bare as she passes from virginity to the goal of her desires, shown by a cloud-like blossoming. The diagram on the glass is thus a frozen moment of endless desire and frustration.
You had to invent a whole new language.
Yes, there's also some kind of literary part to it. It was intended to have every item on the glass, every little design on the glass, explained with with words. It was nothing spontaneous about it, which of course is a great objection, would be a great objection on the part of aestheticians. They want the subconscious to speak by itself. I don't care. And it was the opposite in that way. So at the end of 8 years, even not finished, I decided to stop.
So what is this thing? Well, it's a machine, but we'd be better off calling it a project for an unfinished contraption that could never be built because its use was never clear, because in turn it parodies the language and the forms of science without the slightest regard for scientific probability or cause or effect. Supposing that an engineer were to use this thing as a blueprint, he'd be in deep trouble, because the large glass is never explicit, and looked at from the point of view of technical systems, it's simply absurd. The notes that Duchamp left to go with it are the most scrambled instruction manual that you can imagine, but they're deliberately scrambled. For instance, he talked about the thing running on a mythical fuel of his own invention called love gasoline, which passed through filters into feeble cylinders which activated a desire motor, none of which would really have meant very much to Henry Ford. But this is a meta machine that takes us away from the real world of machinery into that of allegory, with the naked bride up there perpetually disrobing herself in the top half, and down below the poor little bachelors in their empty jackets endlessly grinding away, signaling their frustration to the girl above them. In fact, this thing is an allegory of profane love, which Marcel Duchamp would have us believe is the only sort that is left in the 20th century. Its real text was written by Sigmund Freud in The Interpretation of Dreams, published in 1900. The imposing mechanism of the male sexual apparatus, said Freud, lends itself to symbolization by every sort of indescribably complicated machinery. But the male mechanism of the large glass is not imposing at all. The bachelors are just uniforms, like marionettes. According to Duchamp's notes, they try to indicate their desire to the bride by making the chocolate grinder turn, and it grinds out an imaginary milky stuff like semen, which squirts up through those rings, but can't get into the bride's half of the glass because of that bar. And so the bride is condemned always to tease, and the bachelor's fate is endless masturbation. In one sense, the bride stripped bare is a glimpse into hell, a peculiarly modernist hell of repetition and loneliness. But you could also see it as a declaration of freedom, if you recall the crushing taboos against masturbation that were in force when Duchamp was young. It was the symbol of rebellion against one's parents, and to that extent, the large glass is a free machine, or at least a defiant machine. But it was also a sad machine, a testament to indifference, that emotion of which Duchamp was the master.
Kawani Jolifanto Blumba Ofali Hambla. Grossigam Pafla Habla Hormigaga Gorman. High Globlo Ikora Sulahuji, Holaka Holala, and Logobang, Blagobang, Baso Futaka, ooh.
Here comes the blushing bride, say, isn't she a dream? Though she smiled as she walked by, you can see she's really shy. There stands the groom beside her in a nervous way. That rehearsal was okay, that's all for today. tenderly her bridal veil she has laid aside. It takes a lot of pretty things to make a blushing bride. Wonder why she took that off. It's not so warm inside. But who are we to interfere with any blushing bride? Just what this is all about, really we don't know. Could it be that by mistake we're at a burlesque show? Hasn't she got lovely eyes? They're aglow with pride. It takes a lot of pretty things to make a blushing bride. Treasures all those precious things, and she'll always do so. Tell me, don't you think she has a very lovely trousseau? Folks, we're only fooling. We'll show you what we mean. We're really taking photos for a fashion magazine. You can buy this magazine at a newsstand anywhere. Just say you want a copy of what the blushing bride will wear.
We're in the Philadelphia Museum of Art looking at a large piece of broken glass.
A work of art by Marcel Duchamp. This is The Bride Stripped Bare by her bachelor's even, also known as The Large Glass. Dates to 1915, but he worked on it till 1923, made many studies, wrote a book about it, and declared it in 1923 definitively unfinished.
When he would eventually unpack it after it had been shipped, relating to an exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum, and he found that both large panes had been shattered, he declared it complete.
And he reassembled all the pieces of glass, and decades later he installed it here at the Philadelphia Museum of Art.
This is not a painting. They're not even painted pieces of glass. Instead, he's using lead wire, lead foil, and dust, which he said he cultivated in his apartment in New York City, that he used as the pictorial material.
The choice of glass is a funny one because in Western painting there's an idea of painting as a window through which we look into a world that's as real as the world that we're standing in. But this is so definitively abstracted, so unreal.
But it's interesting because this work of art is not the kind of abstraction that we think of often when we think of work that's being produced in 1915 by people like Kazimir Malevich or even Picasso. This is not in that tradition of formal abstraction, of geometries. This is an abstraction of ideas.
When we look closely, we do start to see forms that are recognizable.
Duchamp actually created what he called the green box. This was a small container that included notes and clippings that described the meanings and the elements within the large glass. But what's interesting is that the green box contained loose pieces of paper that can be read in any order so that the meaning is always in flux. Nevertheless, he does name specific elements.
But we shouldn't look for certainties of meaning anywhere here.
Absolutely, and art historians have sometimes fallen into a trap of trying to be definitive. Nevertheless, if we start at the bottom, on the left side we see a series of forms which Duchamp called Malic molds. Malic was a word that just simply for Duchamp meant male, a word that he made up. He often created linguistic forms. In the center, at the bottom, we see what he referred to as a chocolate grinder. Above that, a series of sieves and giant scissors. And to the right, a little bit difficult to see, and seen obliquely, are optical devices.
So what are we to make of the female realm and the male realm, the bachelors at the bottom, and the bride at the top. Clearly the realm of male and female, but also a sense of sexual desire. The bride stripped bare by her bachelors. We have a sense of male suitors, of male desire, and of the availability of a female form that stimulates that desire.
Or lack of availability. One of the ways that the large glass is read is that it's desire that powers the machinery that activates everything that's being rendered here, both in the realm of the female and the realm of the male, but none of it consummated.
It feels to me like he's making fun of the way that, especially in the 19th and 20th century, human beings try to make things rational, try to explain things, even things as absurd as human desire.
And the way in which the rational could be dangerous. Think about when this was made. This was made in 1915. This was during the First World War, one of the most violent conflicts in human history. And what was so startling about that war is that it took place with modern machinery, the machine gun, early tanks, mustard gas. There was a level of violence that was thanks to our industrial, rational world. And here we see the reintroduction of the irrational.
And you could argue, too, and of course this is an important part of the Dadaist movement in the early 20th century, that art, in many ways, the sale of art, the marketability of art, the schools of art, all of these institutions were part of a system that led to the violence of the war. And so how could art be outside of that?
Well, Duchamp is rejecting oil on canvas. He's rejecting bronze sculpture, marble sculpture, and he's trying to find a way to deconstruct the meanings that have always driven the desire of the art market. And not only were the materials not traditional, but the method of making wasn't traditional either. There was chance that was introduced. There was absurdity in the construction of the object itself. A good example of that can be seen in the holes that are drilled in the upper right corner. And the idea behind this reminds us that there really is interaction between the two realms. The males shoot upward, trying to hit those squares that we see in the kind of thought bubble, in the kind of imagination of the female.
We do have this sense at the bottom of churning, this endless machine processing, this frustrated desire that's not fulfilled.
And violence. The male realm shoots towards the female, and the holes that we're seeing that are drilled are actually the result of Duchamp firing a toy cannon at the upper area, missing the female form, but then the artist would drill wherever the toy cannon actually hit the glass.
So we have this immediate difficulty because we want to have an idea of art that is something that's intentionally made by the artist, that's beautifully crafted, and firing a toy cannon and then drilling where that toy cannon hits completely turns that idea upside down.
That's enough.
Duchamp's approach to creating art would have a profound impact, especially on the second half of the 20th century. People like Jasper Johns or Robert Rauschenberg, or so many of the artists of the post-war era that have rethought the foundational ideas that have driven art for so long. When we were looking at this work, I was looking originally for a signature, because for Duchamp the signature was so important in transforming what he called a ready-made into a work of art, that is, of transforming a ready-made object in the world, something that he had not created, into something that we looked at differently. But this work is itself inherently a signature. The top is the realm of the bride, and the first three letters of the word in French for bride is mar, M-A-R. The bottom, the first three letters of the word for bachelor would be cel, C-E-L, and together they spell, of course, his first name. So the entire work is, in a sense, a kind of wordplay and a kind of signature.
He had destroyed the idea of the artist as sacred, but substituted his own private mystery. Now, having brought painting and life uncomfortably close together, he began to apply his ideas to his own life. He's universally admired by artists. Here are two Americans, the painter Robert Rauschenberg and the composer John Cage. First, Rauschenberg.
I've always found it difficult to talk about Marcel Duchamp's work specifically, because I think that he means more to me as a man who has pursued a particular point of view that was uncommon and remains uncommon. The fact that he approached each of his pieces as though that was the only thing that he was going to do. His recognition of the lack of art in art and the artfulness of everything, I think, is probably his most important contribution.
Late in the 50s, I went to an exhibition of Dada in Düsseldorf. And of all it was quite a complete show. But of all the work there, almost all of it had become art, except, and perhaps for this reason and others, the pun reason, the work of Duchamp remained something that invited one and sharpened one's awareness outside, to something outside the work itself. So that as one went around the rooms of that exhibition, because of the Duchamp, one noticed the handles of doors, vents in the walls and ceilings and so forth. Now I want to turn all of the work of Duchamp in this direction to the pun, that is, to the word that would mean not just art or not just life, but both of them. We don't perhaps have that word, but if Duchamp had been here, say at the beginning when language was invented, we might very well have had such a word.
1924, a year after the large glass picture, Duchamp in Paris, acting out some of his jokes. Here, in a false beard, he's illuminated for a split second as Adam in a ballet by Eric Satie. He appears with the photographer Man Ray in a surrealist film by René Clair. Since his stoppage in 1923, the Duchamp myth has blossomed effortlessly. He's remained in the art world, untied to any clique, never succumbing to his disciples. For a time, he earned the little money he needed by speculating in pictures. He bought on commission for his friend and the great collector of his works, Walter Arensberg. He gave French lessons for a time, ran a small dyeing business which went broke, and helped organize occasional exhibitions. He's always lived very modestly, though he could have had great wealth if he'd painted on. In 1924, he tried some more play with chance on an expedition to Monte Carlo, intending to break even plus 10%, again wanting neither too much nor too little. He floated a loan from his friends on bonds bearing his own photograph disguised as a devil.
I thought that also could be channelized. Chance could be channelized into a system which has, I did not invent that. Every man in Monte Carlo, playing Monte Carlo, has a system. But I thought I might find one that would work. And it might work on such long calculation of probabilities that you'd have to live 25,000 lives to get to a result of the probabilities playing in your favor. And plus the zero and all these things that the Monte Carlo has taken care of before against the gamblers.
How long did you persevere for?
How long I stayed there?
Yes.
Oh, not very long. I worked at it for a year or two on they call Permanence. It is a newspaper, a paper they publish. Every week they publish one sort of tabulation of all the numbers that came out on a certain table. And from that you can make deductions and conclusions and find sometimes a repetition and so forth, a system in other words. But even that, you have to, for example, I remember that I used to play one time every half hour or so. So it was so boring again. It seems that boredom has been in my life a lot. Even that didn't work, and I stopped.
When did you first start doing mechanical optics?
Yes. Well, that was later, 34, I did those discs. No, in first place, no, I had one in 1925, that's right, 24, 25, of the spiral turning to give the idea of the screw, we call it the corkscrew effect. And then that was black and white, and I made a little film of it called Anemic Cinema. And then 10 years later, taking the same idea again, I amplified it by adding, recreating the object. And so those first drawings were abstract spirals. And then I discovered that when two circles overlap one another and turn on a third center, one comes on top of it. So the impression, the third dimension or impression is given by the rotation of a certain drawing. So I made 12 drawings at that time called the roto relief.
Marcel, you spent quite a bit of time in the late 1930s and the early 1940s on your valise. Do you regard that as a distinct personal expression also?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a new form of expression. For me, it was, instead of painting something, it was to use the reproduction of those paintings that I loved so much into a small, reduced form, in a small shape. And how to do it, I didn't know. I thought of book, which I didn't like, so I thought of the idea of a box in which they would be mounted like in a small museum, portable museum, so to speak, and there it is, in this valise.
A sort of ready-made help, as you call it?
Help, yes. See, it opens this way. Out it goes, and then we have the rest of it in this.
Practically all your work is in here.
Practically all of it. I think very few things are missing. You see, this auto-relief.
What is it? Is it a disc that...
Yes, it's a series. It's 12 drawings, different drawings, based on this spiral.
To be used on a gramophone.
To be used on the Victrola. And the effect is that when you turn them at a certain speed, like 33 and a half rounds, turns a minute, you get the effect of
a growing form.
Growing form, like a comb or corkscrew, and the spiral effect, spiralic effect. But they are different drawings. This one, for example, is a glass. It doesn't look like a glass here, but when it turns, this comes up like in third dimension. We have this one here. That's the Dada period, you see. The Mona Lisa with a mustache and a goatee. That was, of course, a great iconoclastic gesture on my part, and
sacrilegious.
Sacrilegious, blasphemous, all you want. But outside of this blasphemous gesture, I have other gestures of the same kind in the Dada period, like this check. I paid my dentist with this check, which was an original check drawn by myself on no bank at all. And he accepted it. He was very good sport, and he accepted it. So what happened, the funniest part of it, is that 10 or 15 years later, I saw him again. I brought the check back from my own collection, and there it is. This is also another one on a system, Monte Carlo system, to win in Monte Carlo, to break the bank in Monte Carlo. Of course, I never broke any bank with it. I thought I had a system, and I made some shares that I sold to different people to make a capital of it and break the bank in Monte Carlo.
Did you undertake it? Did you try to...
Oh, I did. I sold a few shares, of course.
But did you win anything?
No, never won anything. Au lieu de passer ma vie à faire des œuvres d'art sous forme de tableaux, sous forme de sculptures, j'ai pensé je le pense maintenant, je n'ai pas pensé au moment où je le faisais, qu'on pouvait très bien de faire de sa vie, c'est-à-dire sa façon de respirer, sa façon d'agir, sa façon de réagir avec des autres individus. On peut traiter ça comme un tableau, si vous voulez, comme un tableau vivant, même un tableau de cinéma, si vous voulez. Et je crois que, en tout cas, c'est mes conclusions maintenant.
The 50s saw the emergence of an avant-garde scene for the first time in this country. The scene replaced academic art as a kind of category in which you place yourself by, to some extent, making fun of art as it's earnestly or seriously carried on. Duchamp is the scene. He was the first artist to consciously realize there was such a category as avant-garde. And he became an avant-gardist in the most radical way yet. He stated the most, that you made yourself significant, not by producing good art, but by producing recognizably avant-garde art with shocks and surprises and puzzlement built into it.
I don't think Duchamp had a dialectical view. In other words, I'm saying that his objects are just like relics of the saints or something like that. It seems to me he was into some kind of spiritual pursuit that involved the commonplace. He was a spiritualist of Woolworths, you might say. He seemed dissatisfied with painting, or what is called high art. Somebody like Clement Greenberg is opting for high art or modernism from a more orthodox point of view, but Duchamp seems to want to be playful with that modernism. He doesn't see it as absolute. It is like a mechanistic view. He also strikes me as Cartesian in that respect, and I think he once mentioned in an offhand kind of way that he was. Duchamp seems involved in that tradition and all the problems of that tradition. Duchamp was suspicious of this whole notion of mechanism, but he was using it all the time. I don't happen to have a mechanistic point of view of the world, so I really can't accept Duchamp in terms of my own development. There's a great difference between a dialectical view and a mechanistic view. Andy Warhol says that he wants to be a machine. This is the linear and Cartesian attitude developed on a simple level, and I just don't find it very productive. It leads to a kind of Cartesian abyss. I see Duchamp as a kind of priest of a certain sort. He was turning a urinal into a baptismal font. My view is more democratic, and that is why the pose of priest-aristocrat that Duchamp takes on strikes me as reactionary.
Kawani Jolifanto Blumba o Fali Hambla. Grossiga Pafla Habla Hormigada Gorman. High Globlo Ikora Sulahuju. Holaka Holala. And Logobang, Blagobang, Blagobang Baso Futaka. Ooh, ooh, ooh.
That's enough.